Yes, it's time for The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents. The World This Week in partnership with the International Herald Tribune. And we want to welcome John Keating of the Kuwait News Agency. How are you, sir?
Very well, thank you.
Also with us, Vivian Walt of Time Magazine, Dave Clark of the French news agency AFP, and Ron Linker of Dutch public broadcaster. Now, do you say NOS or NOS? What's the...
We say NOS.
NOS, okay.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. The World This Week, which, by the way, you can follow throughout the week on Facebook, and you can also follow us on Twitter, our handle here, at FrançoisF24. It was the week that political cartoonists graduated from bad puns on the fall of ancient Greece to more recent references. We'll show you that of Tom Jansen, the Dutch cartoonist here. There you see it, Silvio Berlusconi fiddling with what looks to be like a euro note while Rome burns. It's finally happening. Il Cavaliere's riding off into the sunset. Now, there's one publication that's never been a big fan of Silvio Berlusconi, The Economist, whose lead editorial begins, "As in many opera, the wounded hero took an unconscionable amount of time to die." Well, it's finally happening, Vivian Walt.
It's hard to believe. We have about 24 more hours before we can really say it's done. The lower house needs to vote tomorrow, but it looks all but done and dusted. And it's really quite incredible if you think about it. The 17 years. I think we have to ask a lot of questions about the Italian voters as well as Berlusconi himself. I mean, Berlusconi is an elected leader. And we have to ask, how much is the kind of real fundamental Italian political culture going to change, or will that kind of lag behind the change in leadership?
How do you explain, Dave Clark, the staying power of what's been Italy's longest-serving prime minister since the war?
Well, yes, it was long a joke that Italy used to hold elections every 3 or 4 weeks, but somehow or other, Silvio Berlusconi kept winning them. Now, he is an elected leader, but obviously he's not a directly elected leader. His party has maintains a majority in parliament through a somewhat rickety coalition. And I think faute de mieux, the Italian right, needed his money and his profile to keep their majority. But I don't think he was ever hurt by newspapers like The Economist attacking him. And after a time, the sex scandals just became so grotesque and ridiculous that they ceased to actually have any kind of meaning for his politics. Once he's braved them out, it doesn't really matter how many more bimbos come out of the woodwork.
Ron Linker, in the end, it wasn't a sex scandal that brought him down.
No, I think it was a crisis of confidence, confidence in this man to lead this country on this very crucial stage in the Euro crisis. And I believe that's what we saw at the G20 in Cannes. When he was there, he was isolated. He was almost ignored by everybody. And I think in the end, apart from the economic crisis, I think the bigger problem for Italy was the confidence crisis, the lack of confidence in this man.
Lack of confidence in this man on the part of all of Europe. It really became this open row at a European summit a month ago, and it was startling, John Keating, to see the head of the IMF last Friday at a press conference in Cannes openly questioning the credibility of Italy's political leadership. It's not something you see every day.
No, and I think I agree that the confidence is gone, but I think the real reason he left is because the markets also wanted him out. There's no more confidence in his economic management. There's no confidence that he can lead Italy out of the situation it's in. It has an almost €2 trillion debt, and Berlusconi doesn't seem to have the wherewithal to deal with this, and the markets want him out. Italy is going to need €400 billion next year to refinance, probably. And I don't think people wanted to give that money to Berlusconi.
Even though exports are high and the deficit's stable, Italy's economy growing slower over the past decade than any nation other than Zimbabwe or Haiti, says The Economist, highlighting the fact that in the World Bank's places where it's easy to do business rankings, Italy is 87th, behind the likes of Albania and Zambia. I suppose these sorts of rankings, Vivian Walt, you take them for what they're worth. But it's sort of interesting to see that this crisis of confidence comes in a system where one word comes up quite a lot: patronage.
Absolutely. And, you know, I just think about Italian colleagues I know, Italian friends I know, and the kind of sense that you get from them over so many years has been that there's just no sense of growth. There's no sense of opportunities ahead. In order to get ahead, you always have to know people in the right place. And the world has moved on so far beyond this. It seemed like Italy's system was simply paralyzed, kind of stuck in time. And this kind of rupture is, you know, it appears to have been a long time coming.
So slow growth, is it a mistake, Dave Clark, then to make it a personal issue? To say, oh, it's just because of this one man, get rid of him? And
well, we'll see on Monday how the markets react to whatever's is cobbled together over the weekend. I understand probably be Prime Minister Monti who will be in charge by then. If the markets might recover, if it is simply a personality issue. One thing to remember is that whereas, as John mentioned, they have almost $2 trillion in debt, 1.9 something trillion. France has 1.7 something trillion. They're not very far behind in terms of total sums. They're the second biggest economy in the Eurozone, Italy's the third. And a lot of France's debt is held by foreign creditors, whereas most of Italy's debt is actually held by Italian investors. France, by some measures, is in a worse position. And its growth is growth prospects have just been downgraded by the European Commission. In many ways, France is in the same situation as Italy, but somehow they've managed to retain a bit more confidence than Italy. And so maybe the key thing is just leadership. Maybe the markets will treat Italy like France.
It is an image problem when you listen to the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, Thursday, saying it's very important that Italy wins back its credibility. When she said that, could be that she may have been thinking about some of the remarks that Silvio Berlusconi has made over the years.
In concrete terms, I'm the most legally persecuted man of all time in the whole history of mankind and the world, because I have been subjected to more than 2,500 court hearings.
2.500 udienze. Da sempre io conduco.
I have always worked solidly and without interruption. And if sometimes I notice a beautiful woman, well, I say it's better to love women than to be gay. I want to pass on the greetings of a man. What is his name? Just a minute. Someone with a tan. Barack Obama.
Ron Linker, his sort of one of the lads attitude, which has been blasted by so many people inside and outside of Italy, especially women's rights groups. Some people say kind of akin to George W. Bush when he was president, playing up the fact that he didn't get good grades in college.
Yes, well, to some voters in America, I think that's appealing to know that this guy, the president, could actually be somebody you would want to have a drink with in a bar or something like that. That could be some of the issues that a voter would be convinced about. In my country, the Netherlands, most politicians are valued because maybe there's an attractiveness to being dull. Just do your job. Be boring, but at least get the job done. Don't get in the news with all these rumors about females, women, whatever. Just do your job. And I think in my country, Berlusconi is known for all these scandals, for Bunga Bunga and what have you. And I think my country would appreciate Italy to have a leader that is a little bit more respectable.
All right, the Daily Telegraph reacting to the news inside the country, to the fact that throughout the week, and John Keating was mentioning the markets a moment ago, bond ratings for the first time topping 7% on 10-year bonds. There you see the headline. That was on Thursday's Telegraph. Investors ditch the Eurozone. That's just the business page, the front page headline, while Rome burns, the Eurozone fiddles. Turns out the Telegraph is not so far off the mark when it comes to the wider Eurozone.
Di concentramento nazisti.
For the European economy is unfortunately gloomy, as we know. This forecast is in fact the last wake-up call. The recovery in the European Union has now come to a standstill, and there is a risk of a new recession unless determined action is taken.
I was going to say, John Keating, is there any light at the end of the tunnel here?
Very little. And I think also that we're being led astray on the actual depth of this crisis. The figures that we hear so far, I did a little calculation today. If you look at the bailouts so far, and if we bail out Italy with 400 billion next year, we're looking at 903 billion euros needed. We have a financial stability facility, which is
in theory at 400 and something.
440, and they're talking about putting it up to 1 trillion. Apparently, Angela Merkel has a small group of wise men around her who advise her on what is going to happen, and they're telling her she should look for 3.1 trillion euros to deal with this crisis. So we're very, very far from the end of this, and I think that there's no light at the end of the tunnel. In fact, I don't think we're even in the tunnel yet.
Not even in the tunnel yet. When we look, for instance, at the figures that are out on Greek unemployment this Friday, they confirm a chilling trend. Greek unemployment, which was 12% a year ago, now 18.4%. Those are the numbers out this Friday. And youth unemployment, well, the figures are even scarier. And the question is, you see these kinds of numbers, Vivian Wald, and you see the fact that the IMF and the suits, as it were, are due to arrive in Athens at the beginning of the week. How are Europeans going to take it all? And it's more than just the euro. What's the future of Europe in this context?
Well, I think I agree with John. I mean, we don't really know the full blow. We haven't felt the full blow of this crisis yet. You know, it's what Berlusconi said. The restaurants are full. I mean, a terribly crass remark, but in effect, he was correct. You walk around Paris, the restaurants are full. And it's very difficult for us, I think, to grasp what a real recession in Europe is going to look like and what it's going to feel like on the streets and what kind of, you know, mass action there might be on the street, which we still have not seen this winter. But when the big austerity programs hit in Greece and Italy, I would think, you know, however technocratic these new governments are in Athens and Rome, they are going to have to get down into some kind of a bar brawl with people on the streets. And it's going to be very interesting to see what Europe is going to look like then.
It's going to be ugly.
I would think so.
It's going to be very ugly. I think we're facing huge social problems. I think we're facing a situation in Greece was probably just a precursor of what we're going to have in Italy. I think the situation in France is extremely delicate. I think that the forecasts for economic growth in the European Union have been shaved down to 0.5%. And Greece, you were just giving the data for Greece. Greece is looking at 5.5% contraction of the economy next year.
And they've got 33% to pay on the remaining bonds. Yeah.
And it's very hard to know where this is going. Austerity on top of recession, it's going to be very, very difficult.
There's going to be a lot of pressure on the European Central Bank just to stop printing euros. The Germans won't like it.
No.
But that's how we've got out of recessions in the past. Just print euros.
And massive inflation.
Inflate our way out of this.
Ron Linker, earlier in the week on this set, we had one panelist mentioning, well, the big problem is that ultimately the Greeks are Greek and the Germans are German. At one point, do the Dutch feel, wait, this isn't our problem anymore?
Already they feel like, you know, every euro that comes from the Netherlands that goes to Greece is a euro wasted. Majority of the Dutch people say we don't want to spend our money like that. And just today, there was one of the parties that supports the government, is not in the government, the PVV. It announced that it wants to investigate whether or not it will be able for the Netherlands, good for the Netherlands to go back to the guilder, the old-fashioned guilder. It's probably going to be very expensive to leave the Eurozone, but I think there is a border drawn between the countries that have always maintained budget discipline and those who haven't.
All right, it's more than the euro, by the way, that's at stake with the crisis perhaps coming to a head in the city where the concept of European unity was launched, let's remember, a half century ago. if you're superstitious, then you might find it premonitory when back in 2003, the former French president Valéry Giscard d'Estaing came to Rome to tout the ill-fated plan to have a European constitution.
La longueur des traités successifs avec les protocoles, avec ainsi de suite. Bravo.
Well done. Did you get it?
Bon, je ne veux rien dire. Mais...
I don't want to say anything, but...
Bon.
CDU constitution will only ever have claimed one victim.
Dave Clark, when you look back at those images, to think that back in 2003, we were talking about a European constitution.
Yes, and that failed very quickly. And whatever happens in this debt crisis, that dream of the United States, of 27 states of Europe, that's gone. If the euro survives this, it'll be as a core eurozone, and then there'll be other countries on the outside.
But all the talk the past couple of weeks.
And if the euro doesn't survive this, it'll explode.
But all the talks the past couple of weeks, Dave, is that the answer is going to be to have more economic management from Brussels.
That's the talk in Berlin. That's not the talk in London. Very, very far from that being the talk in London, and I'm sure that's not the talk in Athens, and probably not in quite a lot of the other more fringe states. I don't think right now you could convince the Dutch to pay a lot more to hang on in Europe. And the Germans themselves don't want to pay for this. The Germans think that the only way to save the union is to hang tough around this. But if they do that, it will be with a smaller group of nations, because some nations can't afford to stay in, and some nations don't want to stay in.
Yeah, but they're placing bureaucrats, former Euro bureaucrats, in places. In Italy, we're going to have a former commissioner. In Greece, we have a former central bank deputy governor, and these are tightening up from Brussels.
When we come back, we'll look at some of the other main issues of the week, including the ratcheting up of tension in another part of the world, the Middle East. Stay with us.